It's a pleasure to be here. I'm super excited to talk about metrics. So welcome to our webinar today with hireEZ. Again, I'm Jer Langhans. Our topic is hot engagement metrics, which might not even matter in the end. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, as a founder, why recruiting is important, but we don't have time for that. All we got to do is dive right into metrics. So the hype for you guys is when you go to that next leadership meeting, when you're in that recruiting managers meeting, when you're talking to your hiring manager, you're going to get some data, right? And you're going to be able to come to the table with that data and be heard. And so that's a big part about why metrics are super hot right now, especially with concerns around cost and that sort of thing. We'll unpack all of that today. Let's go to the next slide. I guess, why should you listen to me? I fell in love with recruiting. I actually literally fell into recruiting back in the day. And I, as an agency recruiter, I really fell in love with this idea of helping people not only with their careers, but also the other side of it, helping employers find and hire ideal candidates for hard to fill roles. Like that was my jam, right? I was super excited about that. I got in right after college, like way before LinkedIn. So it's been a while. And I've been able to, be on the forefront of the tools that are being developed, staying close to technology. In fact, I had a front row seat to watch as these grew and changed and evolved and became better. And we got to do some important things around employment branding as well. We won't have time to get into that today as well. Because we have to just do like metrics. But I wanted to mention that I'm always looking at it through the lens of someone that cares about the candidate experience from an employment brand perspective. And then I've also had the pleasure of a few startups that had exits. So 3 HR tech startups with exits. I've been a user of hireEZ since day one, and it's always been our go-to platform. Even, as it's evolved, it's always been something for outbound recruiting. Like from day one, which was like 2016, I think it was June of 2016, I joined up on hireEZ. And it's always been the way that we've looked at managing our, relationships with our talent pipelines, with our candidates specifically on an individual basis. Like it is our go-to platform. One other thing I'll say, and then we can go to the next slide is, when you look at your career, if you don't think about it as something that I would say, if you look at your career and you decide it's not where you want it to be, I would recommend that you start looking at data as a way to elevate your career. Data was helpful as an agency recruiter. Data was helpful as a sourcer 20 years ago at Microsoft. It was hugely impactful for basically everything on this list, and we're going to get into it. So instead of thinking of metrics, because metrics is kind of a boring word, let's go with data. Why not? All right, let's go to the next slide. So today's topics, I'm just going to run through these real quick. We're going to talk about trending hot metrics in 2023. In fact, if you get anything from this at all, I would walk away with like, what are the trending hot metrics in 2023? Like that's something you can bring back to your team. That is something we can provide for you guys. Understanding the why behind metrics. We're not just doing metrics for metrics' sake. Also, which metrics help you achieve your goals. So some metrics are just metrics that give you insight and signal, and other ones actually help you achieve your goal. And I'm going to highlight a case study with permission from LG Electronics. We're going to actually look at some real metrics. And again, we can give these to you. You can screenshot, you can hit us up. My contact info is going to be at the end there. And then last but not least, we're going to give away a sprint. So that's pretty cool. Trending hot metrics in 2023. We're always, since I started in recruiting 20 years ago, we've always been answering the age-old question of how much effort is it going to take to fill this role, right? So whether that's personal effort, whether that's team effort, whether that's political, internal, corporate effort, whether that's effort to get budget. That's the fundamental question around what metrics become hot. And the thing is too, that doesn't really change. So right now, everybody's talking a lot about funnel metrics. And how much engagement do we need to fill the role? At least in my past experience, and I loved both the companies, the corporate companies that I mentioned before, they just want to know what's the bare minimum sometimes to fill a position. So let's say you open a rec and you have one person that applies and you hire that one person. That's almost like a perfect, most efficient, funnel. And sometimes that's how you can do it. And then other times you need to go out and research the total addressable talent market, through multiple sources. And you need to think in terms, and we'll show this to you, titles, skills, locations, and really understand what's the potential or, addressable market. And then also, how many of those do I need to identify specifically and reach out to? So the top of the funnel, we're going to define that as the volume or number of candidates emailed and response rate percentage. So there'll be a whole section on that. 10, 12. Wow, time flies. We're also going to get into, if we have time, interview and offer conversion rate milestones. It's a little bit different way to say, how are we tracking the fact that we're making hires and telling that story to everybody at the table? Again, whether that's table is, the hiring team that you're talking to, or maybe it's the HR leader you're talking to, you need to have those hot metrics to bring to the table. All right, let's go to the next slide. Let's also keep in mind that achieving the actual hire is the final objective. Like at the end of the day, it's called talent acquisition because you're acquiring talent. It's called recruiting because you're recruiting people. And we still need to, as I mentioned before, understand what efforts are required to be effective. In fact, we came across a study that said 99% of people get rejected throughout the process. And that's easy to think about too. Like, let's say you have an opening and you make your hire and there was 100 people that applied, just for easy numbers. I'd venture to guess that 99 of those did not get hired. So 99 people got dispositioned or rejected or whatever you want to call it. And you need to have other data points to tell the story during the hiring journey, to everyone, inside, externally, if you're able to. But you need to have a story about what metrics you used and why you use them, because that keeps everyone informed. And you want to make intelligent decisions, but you also want to make informed decisions. So your hiring managers are going to be better about, for example, and we'll get into this, but whether the job should be virtual or not. Whether they're going to go internal with a current employee, or whether they've even tried employee referral to get external. But keeping everyone informed about those decisions, and having them understand the why behind what you're tracking and what you're reporting on is going to be super huge. All right, let's go to the next one. This is like the whole thing right here, Kunwar. This is the whole thing right here. What are hot metrics in 2023? How much effort is needed to fill the role? We're always going to come back to that. Okay, next slide. Just as a reminder too, you guys can put questions in chat. We're going to get to some questions at the end. I'm kind of going quickly so that we can get into some back and forth. I love to just chat with everyone that's in here, and get some questions going back and forth. So just go ahead and throw those in there. And I have those popped up as well as Kunwar has those popped up. But the bulk of what we're going to talk about is this case study. So we're doing a sprint. We call them sprints. It's research and outreach for LG here. And, I took this screenshot. It's actual data. Again, we have permission to share this. But we wanted to keep our teams informed about how their pipeline was looking for this role, right? And we wanted them to just take a look. A lot of times, I'd say most of the time, You report on like, hey, I reached out to 15 people for this position that applied, and 3 of them got back to me and we interviewed them. That's a lot of times how these things go. And we wanted to, sort of scale that up and really look at, as we said before, or as I said before, the total addressable market of talent for any given position. Now, these are different campaigns here, but you can see like the one I highlighted is pretty hot. Only 50 recipients, so it wasn't like a huge campaign, but we got 80% open rate and 23% response rate. Now, if you had to pick just one hot metric, in my mind, you have a decision here. So if you're talking to the hiring manager, you might go with the just take a look example. You might say, hey, hiring manager, I'm just trying to get candidates to take a look at LG. I'm trying to just have them take a look at your position. So every single person that opens it, assuming all the recipients are, qualified to receive the outreach, that look pretty good on paper. I want to track a hot metric of how many people open that. Now, when I'm reporting to, let's say, the recruiting leader, I'm going to tell her probably she doesn't care about open, probably, right? Because they have a hot brand, what have you. What she'll want to understand is what's our response rate look like compared to what we normally look at. So in other words, hey, we got 23% on that. Is that good? Is that mid? Is that below standard? And again, the baseline that we've set with them. So all of these are LG campaigns, different open rates. We never really put links. We tried it once, 3% clicked. We don't really put links. Probably can get into that at some other time. But what we were looking at is like, okay, response rate by position, by location, and then also open rate. We'll go to the next slide. I had to make that one big. Okay, so talking about top titles and skills. When you're, before we started outreach, we had to do research, right? And so people are always like, I did research. Well, what does that mean? Did you just like go Google some things, talk to some people? Sure, that's research. But what we wanted to do is look at in detail, again, the total addressable talent market through multiple sources, for example, title, skills, location. So right here, when we look at all the people that were in those campaigns, so kind of looking at all the campaigns for that position or that requisition or that job order or that sprint or whatever you want to call it, the top titles and the top skills. So, 220 of them had a exact match title to the other person in their cohort, meaning, yes, people could call it something different at different companies, but the overwhelming majority went with this standardized title. And so that's like a key insight, right? Is you go back to your hiring team and you say, hey, listen, you have this posted as XYZ, but when we look at the distribution of candidates' current working titles, we notice that 58% of them are using X as a title. Okay, maybe I should change my title. And I think that's a key point. I know I'm speed running through some of this, but I want to take a moment to like just sit on this one real quick. When you're sourcing, so let's pretend, I'm just gonna make up a hypothetical. Let's say LG comes to me and says, hey, I want to call this role, sourcing leader. And I'm like, I don't think it should be called sourcing leader. I think it should just be called talent acquisition manager, sourcing. It's like, why call it that? That doesn't sound as cool. And it's like, well, either call it that or we'll source against that. And because 220 of them are using that title. So I don't want to get into a whole thing with this talent pool or talent pipeline or total addressable talent market. I don't want to get a whole thing with why did you call it that? And what does that actually mean? There is some interesting, I would say interesting business advice that you can give people around titling if you have the data, right? So anyways, that's my soapbox there. Top skills. This is great as well, because these were some of the things we were looking for. And some of these things are soft skills like leadership. Well, how do you manage leadership? Well, you might have some tooling that actually has that, tag or faceted search or whatever the case may be. Looks like we're getting a question. Kumar, I'll just go ahead and answer these live. So Dave Ners asks, would a director of learning and development more likely to draw a response/interest to a manager of L&D, or the L ampersand D, the shorthanded way to write it? I think that's a great question. I even think that my subject line in my email did L&D as L ampersand T. But it's an interesting conversation. And again, some metrics are hot for some folks and some are not. So the candidate might want to see the L&D so that kind of the lingo, and you might get a better response rate. But then also when you're sourcing in the tool, you might want to go ahead and spell it out because 58% of your folks have spelled it out actually. Okay, next slide. Great question though.
And Jer, I wanted to add another component to that question, if you don't mind. So I think they might also be getting at is sort of like the position of who is reaching out to that individual. So have you, in your experience, maybe had any scenarios where who the email is coming from makes a difference in influencing like response rate?
For sure. So, let's pretend in Dave's scenario that the email was not coming from me, but it was coming from the vice president, and this was for a director, or the email is coming from a director and this was for a manager. That would make sense. Yes, there's two reasons why on enterprise sourcing. So it's going to be different. It's going to be different for small companies or companies that aren't a household name. Okay, so that caveat aside, if a director at LG sent out 200 emails in a sprint, they would get better response rate than I got. Right. But if we go back to my response rate, it was 20 or 30%, I'm still okay with that.
Right.
And the trade-off of what's hot, what's not, what really matters in the end, who cares, whatever, the trade-off of that is I'm acting as a buffer, because some of the responses in this case study, some of the responses are going to be selling some stuff, right? They're going to be maybe trying to flip the script or just kicking a tire or networking. And I don't know if I want my director of L&D to have, so I had 23 people respond at half an hour per call. That's like 11 hours. I don't want to put like 11 and a half hours on my hiring manager's schedule, because again, 99% of them are going to not get the job. And that's just a lot of like candidate relationship management. But you for sure could do it that way.
I think Dave put a follow-up to.
I see that. All right, so we did the hypothetical scenario, and he's getting at, if everyone calls themselves managers, would your title of director draw more interest? I see what you're saying. Yeah, well, it was a manager level position. I couldn't call it a director. Okay, so let's go to slide 10. We only have a few more slides, so wake up, get ready. This will probably be like a half an hour webinar if there's not a bunch of Q&A, but I'm going to stick around. This is, again, a preview of what we're going to deep dive on next month. So here we go with some more on the case study. Now, we also, as we're doing our research, looking at top companies and locations, like where are we going to find these people? Interestingly enough, and as we, were able to converse with the hiring team, they said no on reload. It's like, oh, okay. So a lot of these people, when we look at locations, Denver, Austin, Atlanta, Orlando, those people just kind of, we just said, hey, it's an in-person role, in-person training, I think it was, they got it. They just kind of have to be here. So that changes the conversation as well when you get a no on reload, and you need to come to the conversation with some data. You can't come to the conversation with like, I think PwC has a few of these people just anecdotally, because immediately if you're talking to a strong leader, they're going to say, well, what about Deloitte? Does Deloitte have these people? And then they're going to say, what about, do we even want consultants? And then they're going to be like, hey, how many of these people are in New York? And are they going to commute from the city up to where HQ is. And so if you're just making stuff up or like trying to do it on LinkedIn while you're doing an intake with the hiring manager, you're going to look like every other average recruiter out there. And that's not the point. That's not my hope for you. Yeah, and relo equals relocation. I'm sorry. So in other words, the position was open in New Jersey, and even the New York people we sourced, which was, let me see that number again, 77 total of the 200 to 300, 77 total in New York City. We even had to break that research down and to see who's commutable because we got told no on offering relocation, like a big fatty relocation package, basically. So we want somebody local. So then that breaks that down. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the big whammy question, and you're not going to find this data on LinkedIn. So shout out to our partner hireEZ for this data. Average market salary. Don't ask again, if you want to be using hot metrics to further your career as a recruiter or a leader on this call, think about it this way. Like, you should come to the plate, to the intake meeting with the folks and be like, listen, on average, people are making about 120, just ballpark, have the slide up, but then say, hey, I think they're making about 120 to 130. You were telling me to look for people, and I'm making this up, but you were telling me to look for people at 300K. LG did not say that, disclaimer. Wouldn't that be great? $300,000 to be a trainer, right? But when you come to this, then you can say like, hey, we're not going to get someone for 90, and we're not going to pay more than 170. So it's really in this range, and this is actual data. And then on the diversity side, and we'll get to the question on the diversity side. Wow, 279 are women. We have 5% Black or African American, US only. We have 5% Asian, 3% Hispanic, 1% veteran. And again, this is just our distribution of candidates based on diversity categories. This is our best guess. This isn't EOE, like ATS, opt-in, like application stuff. This is all passive candidate sourcing. But before we get to the next slide, let me see what your question is. Ted Bromberg says, all crowdsourced salary data, right? Yes, Ted, based on available compensation data on the open web. Correct. Again, we're coming with some data instead of going to the conversation with, how much are we paying? Oh, I don't know. How much should we pay? Like, that's an average recruiter. You got to come and say, hey, I have this data, and maybe you're not senior enough to make a conclusion, or vice versa. Maybe you are the leader and you need to come with some thought leadership point of view to say, I did some research. Here's the data. Here's my source of that data. And here's the numbers. And just tell the business, like, hey, you guys have this at, 110 max. I need like 10 more. Otherwise, we're excluding 38% of the total addressable market. Like, what? Who's this guy? Who's this gal? Or they say, hey, we want a diversity hire. I think that, it'd be a redheaded male for the job would be diversity hire based on the current population of employees. But maybe they said, hey, we just wanted, a woman for this job. For some reason, we have 5 guys and no women. It's like, okay, great. Because 279 of them are, at least we think, directionally accurate based on open web, based on whatever. And so you come with something for them to react to and a point of view. Like, if a hiring manager, recruiter told me, hey, sourcer, I need a woman for this job, I'd be like, great, because that bar graph looks really big. But if they said, hey, I want, a veteran, I'd be like, ooh, okay, I got to think through this problem and solve this problem. All right, let's go to the slide 12 we'll wrap this sucker up pretty soon here. This was the big hurrah. So 241 contacted. Again, these are screenshots from my login. 56 replied, 23 introduced to client. And I think if you click 2 offers, 2 hires, you can see a CPH there. The super exciting thing about 2 offers, 2 hires is we're now into this ratio of it takes about 10 or 11 people. So an introduced to client, or an intro, is someone that's qualified, they're interested, they're available to hop on a call. Not just, hey, thanks, but no thanks. Here's my LinkedIn, what have you. This is their ready to phone screen, and we send them over. And so we're finding out good brand, good process, good job description, good sourcing, good hiring team, good recruiting leader, that they can get a couple offers and they happen to close, but you can get that off of 23, we boiled the whole ocean down to 23 perfect candidates. So the ratio is like 11-1, if that makes sense. So let's go last slide. Well, we have a couple more slides, but we'll open it up for some Q&A here.
Awesome. And Jer, I just had a clarifying question here. So for the hires that you guys were able to achieve, like when you broke down the metrics, that cost per hires for each individual hire, or it's total for both hires that you made?
Yeah, it's this, and I should, maybe people don't use this, so I don't say it, but it's really the sourcing cost per hire. So obviously there's other cost per hire metrics that get added in, but this is how much it costs per hire to source these people. Proactive outbound recruiting, aka sourcing, aka research and outreach. So that's what the cost was for each sourced candidate.
Cool.
I know they roll up a whole bunch of things into cost per hire. So that's just the part, as a sourcer, that's the part I would hand off to them. It's like, okay, that's what it costs to source and hire. And then, compare that to an agency fee. And I think you're looking pretty, Okay, so what are hot metrics in 2023? Again, how much effort is needed to fill the role? And behind that effort, you can put cost, you can put quality, you can put timing, you can put a lot of things behind that. But really, that's what you're always answering the question for your team is, how much effort is it going to take to fill the role?